UPS, because only UPS Total Track captures...
Never keep those droids on the run. The new Sinclair Action Pack puts the zap back into computers.
Technology has reshaped our existence, stripping away the essence of what it means to be human. Our minds are drowning in artificial distractions, our connection to nature is fading, and society is spiraling into a state of psychological and spiritual decay. The relentless march of industrial progress has not only fractured our well-being but has also placed the entire planet on a path toward irreversible destruction. These issues transcend politics. No ideology holds the monopoly on the consequences of technological overreach. The trajectory is clear. Things will only get worse. So, what if the only solution was to erase it all and start from scratch? This radical notion was at the core of one of the most infamous figures of modern history, Ted Kaczynski. Also known as the Unabomber, he waged a covert war against the very systems he believed were dooming humanity. Over nearly 2 decades, he meticulously crafted explosive devices and mailed them to individuals he saw as architects of industrial expansion, executives in the advertising sector, advocates of large-scale deforestation, and pioneers in computing. He was a thinker, a writer, and above all, a man convinced that he had seen the future long before anyone else. As he orchestrated his attacks, he poured his ideology into a manifesto, an unsettlingly precise dissection of the technological age and its inevitable consequences. Decades later, many of his grim predictions have proven disturbingly accurate. Despite his violent methods, Kaczynski was far from an unhinged madman. Throughout his life, he exhibited an intelligence that set him apart, a mind operating at an extraordinary level. So, how did a child prodigy, a mathematics genius, become one of the most feared men in modern history? And why was he so determined to bring down the world as we know it? From an early age, Ted Kaczynski stood out as a prodigy. His intellect was nothing short of extraordinary. He skipped multiple grades, bypassing both the 6th and 11th years of school, and graduated high school at the astonishing age of 15. By 16 he was already walking the halls of Harvard, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. At just 20 he earned his bachelor's degree, but despite his academic brilliance, this was the point where his life began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. During his time at Harvard, Kaczynski became involved in a psychological experiment that, to this day, remains one of the most controversial studies ever conducted. Participants believed they were signing up for a philosophical debate where they would analyze their personal aspirations and ideals. However, the reality was far more sinister. The deeply personal essays they submitted were handed over to an anonymous figure whose sole purpose was to dissect, degrade, and verbally assault the participants, tearing apart their dreams and beliefs with merciless precision. These brutal psychological attacks continued for 3 years, all while researchers monitored the participants' brain activity. Although Ted later claimed that the experiment had no lasting effect on him, it's difficult to ignore the potential impact. A young mind, no matter how brilliant, is still vulnerable. Could this have been one of the many catalysts that pushed him toward his radical worldview? We may never know for sure. By 1966, Kaczynski's internal struggles had reached a critical point. He began experiencing intense thoughts about undergoing a gender transition and scheduled an appointment with a psychiatrist to discuss the possibility. However, as he sat in the waiting room, he was suddenly overwhelmed by a wave of doubt and disgust. In that moment, something inside him shifted irreversibly. As he walked out of the clinic, he was filled with rage, not just toward himself but toward society as a whole. He later admitted that, at that moment, he fantasized about killing the psychiatrist in a way that would allow him to continue killing without being caught. Though he never acted on that violent impulse, he described this experience as a defining turning point in his life. An awakening. He wrote that he emerged from this psychological abyss, like a phoenix from the ashes, with a renewed sense of clarity and purpose. Not long after, Ted Kaczynski abandoned his promising career as a university professor, severed ties with conventional society, and retreated into the wilderness of Montana. There he built a small, isolated cabin without electricity or running water, determined to disconnect from the technological world he had come to despise. Though he took occasional odd jobs, much of his financial support came from his parents, allowing him to focus on his ultimate goal: complete self-sufficiency. Surviving on wild plants, small game, and the raw challenge of nature, Kaczynski was not merely seeking solitude, he was preparing for war. His radical ideology was taking shape, and it was from this secluded hideaway that he would launch one of the most notorious eco-terrorist campaigns in history. Life in the Montana wilderness was supposed to offer Ted Kaczynski peace, an escape from the relentless expansion of industrialized society. But one day, as he ventured through the rugged terrain surrounding his remote cabin, he stumbled upon a sight that filled him with uncontrollable rage. A once pristine ridge near a waterfall, one of his favorite secluded spots, had been mutilated by a newly constructed road. This wasn't just an inconvenience. To Ted, it was proof that there was no escaping the relentless march of human progress. He later described his reaction to this discovery in raw, emotional terms. "You just can't imagine how upset I was." At that moment, something inside him hardened. He made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. Survival skills no longer mattered. What mattered now was revenge. And revenge he would get. Ted's anger first manifested in acts of vandalism, targeting anything he saw as an intrusion into the wild. When a vacation home was built less than a mile from his cabin, he didn't hesitate. He broke in and trashed the place. Snowmobiles and motorcycles, symbols of technological encroachment, were sabotaged. He poured sugar into gas tanks, rendering the vehicles useless. A bulldozer caught fire under mysterious circumstances. A construction worker's truck was found wrecked deep in the woods. But to Ted, these acts were merely skirmishes. The real war was still to come. Between 1978 and 1995, Kaczynski escalated from petty sabotage to outright terrorism. Over nearly 2 decades, he meticulously crafted and delivered homemade explosives, targeting those he believed were advancing the destruction of nature. His bombs, either mailed or personally placed, killed 3 people and injured 23 others. His victims ranged from university professors to airline executives, people he saw as architects of a technological world that was poisoning the human spirit. The attacks were so unpredictable and sophisticated that by 1979, the FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in its history. A special task force of 150 investigators was dedicated to tracking down the elusive terrorist, codenamed Unabomber, a reference to his focus on university and airline targets. Yet despite their best efforts, years passed with virtually no progress. Ted had mastered the art of deception. He deliberately planted misleading clues, making sure to include fingerprints in his bomb packages, but none of them were his. For nearly 2 decades he remained a ghost. Then, in 1995, Kaczynski made a move that would ultimately lead to his downfall. He sent his now infamous Manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, to several major media outlets, demanding that it be published in a national newspaper. He promised that if his essay saw the light of day, the bombings would stop. It was a gamble, but one that would change everything. Ted Kaczynski begins his manifesto with a striking claim: the Industrial Revolution and its aftermath have been disastrous for humanity. In his view, modern civilization has been shaped in a way that completely disregards the natural conditions for which humans evolved. Over the course of roughly 35,000 words, he expands on this idea, positioning nature as the only viable escape from the problems created by an industrialized society. According to Kaczynski, technology has turned humans into mere cogs in a vast system, where efficiency is prioritized above everything else, even individual freedom. Every aspect of life is carefully structured to ensure people conform to the needs of the system. Well-being in this framework is not defined by personal fulfillment but by an individual's ability to function productively within society's economic and technological structures. He points to attention disorders as an example. While they pose no inherent danger to life, they are treated as medical conditions because they interfere with a person's ability to be efficient in a modern workplace. Similarly, rather than addressing the root causes of rising depression rates, society merely provides pharmaceutical solutions, medications that help people tolerate a reality that would otherwise be unbearable. To Kaczynski, this pattern is present in every facet of life. Instead of adapting the system to meet human needs, humans are continuously reshaped to fit the demands of the system. He also argues that technology initially appears to be entirely beneficial. Innovations such as sanitation, electricity, and telecommunications are difficult to reject. However, as these technologies become deeply embedded in society, they ultimately restrict individual autonomy. One of Kaczynski's key examples is the automobile. At first, owning a car was an optional luxury. Over time, though, cities were designed around car ownership, making it an unavoidable necessity for many. This means that people must now conform to all the obligations that come with owning a vehicle. Working to afford it, paying for registration and insurance, dealing with traffic and risking accidents. Even those without cars are affected, relying on public transportation that limits their mobility. Pedestrians, meanwhile, are confined to designated sidewalks and pathways, constantly at risk of being harmed by reckless drivers. Kaczynski acknowledges that we live in a so-called free society, but he argues that this freedom is an illusion. People are free only as long as their actions do not interfere with the functioning of the system. The moment someone challenges the established order, whether legally, morally, or socially, they become a threat. He asks, what kind of freedom is it if you can only exercise it in ways prescribed by someone else? In his eyes, a human under such conditions is not truly free, only a dog on a longer leash. Another key aspect of his critique is the lack of real control individuals have over their own lives. Modern society operates through vast networks of collaboration between millions of people and machines. As a result, major decisions are never made by individuals but by politicians, corporations, and technocrats. Even in a democratic system, an individual vote carries almost no weight in the grand scheme of things. Kaczynski argues that in a world where each person's influence is microscopic, true autonomy does not exist. Beyond this, Kaczynski asserts that the structure of industrial society forces people to seek out superficial goals to compensate for the lack of real challenges. Since basic survival is now effortless for most, people latch onto pursuits that, deep down, are unfulfilling. A relentless money chaser will never be satisfied. A political activist will never see their work finished. A collector will never own every possible item. According to Kaczynski, this endless cycle of artificial objectives creates a profound psychological void. After all, how can someone truly feel alive without a meaningful goal to strive for? Finally, he warns that industrial society doesn't just shape people's habits and behaviors. It may one day alter their very biology. He predicts a future where technocrats gain the power to genetically modify humans to better serve the system. In this scenario, humans would no longer be natural beings but mass-produced products designed to fit society's demands. Kaczynski also believed that as technology became increasingly complex, it would become impossible to foresee the long-term consequences of new innovations, leading to an uncontrollable spiral of change with potentially catastrophic outcomes. Kaczynski believed that as technology continued advancing, human decision-making would become increasingly obsolete. The complexities of an industrialized society, he argued, would eventually surpass human comprehension, leaving artificial intelligence as the only viable option for governance. While AI itself would not be conscious or self-aware, it would still be the only force capable of managing the overwhelming intricacies of the modern world. In this vision of the future, human control over society would gradually erode, with machines and algorithms assuming dominance over every aspect of life. However, Kaczynski did not see this as a problem that could be solved through reform. In his view, the idea of reforming the system was not only unrealistic but outright foolish. He believed that technology, once introduced, only continued to expand. History had demonstrated that technological progress was an unstoppable force, always moving forward with no real possibility of being reversed. Any attempts to implement serious reforms, he argued, would require such drastic and far-reaching changes that they could easily spiral into catastrophe. Those in power, the people who benefited from the system, would never be willing to take such a risk. Kaczynski also harshly criticized those who placed their faith in technology as a problem solver. He pointed out that for centuries, technophiles had promised that science would eliminate humanity's struggles, yet these problems had only multiplied. He cited the Industrial Revolution as an example. Initially hailed as a solution to poverty and hunger, it instead resulted in mass exploitation, environmental destruction, and worsening inequality. According to Kaczynski, those who believed science would fix all of humanity's issues ignored the fact that every solution created new, often worse, problems. As one example, scientists promised to end famine with genetically engineered crops. But this, he warned, would only allow populations to expand unchecked, leading to overcrowding, increased stress, and ultimately greater suffering. Faced with what he saw as an inevitable decline into technological oppression, Kaczynski called for revolution. Not reform, not slow change, but the total destruction of the industrial system. He saw this as the only path forward, despite recognizing that such a revolution would cause immense suffering. In his mind, the alternative was even worse. If technology was allowed to continue expanding unchecked, the level of suffering in the future would be far greater than anything a revolution could cause in the present. From his perspective, tearing everything down as soon as possible was actually the more humane choice, preventing an even larger catastrophe later. While Kaczynski despised industrial society, he revered nature. He saw it as the antidote to every problem created by modern technology. Primitive human beings, he believed, lived in harmony with their environment, free from the psychological and societal burdens of the modern world. According to Kaczynski, true freedom could only exist when humans were forced to provide for their own basic survival, hunting, foraging, and building their own shelters. Without industrial structures shaping their lives, people could achieve a sense of fulfillment that modern society had robbed them of. Interestingly, many of Kaczynski's beliefs might be considered left-wing by today's standards, as they focused on dismantling industrial capitalism and rejecting technological expansion. However, he despised leftists. A significant portion of his manifesto is dedicated to attacking liberals, whom he saw as hypocritical, weak, and obsessed with superficial activism. At the same time, he had no love for conservatives either, ridiculing them for demanding endless economic growth while simultaneously resisting social change. In his mind, the pursuit of economic expansion would always lead to cultural and societal shifts, something conservatives failed to acknowledge. Ultimately, Kaczynski rejected all political ideologies, believing that the only divide that truly mattered was between those seeking to control others and those fighting for freedom. His revolution, however, never came. After Kaczynski's manifesto was published in the Washington Post, his brother, David, recognized his writing style and contacted the authorities. In 1996, the FBI raided his remote Montana cabin, bringing his decades-long war against industrial society to an end. He was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Then, on June 10, 2023, he was found dead in his prison cell, likely by suicide. Looking back, It's hard to deny that many of Kaczynski's predictions about the future of technology have proven eerily accurate. The issues he warned about, rampant surveillance, loss of personal freedoms, and a world increasingly controlled by machines, have all become reality in one way or another. However, while his analysis of modern civilization may have contained some truth, his chosen solution was nothing short of horrifying. No matter how deep society's problems may be, sending bombs in the mail was never going to fix them. After 2 decades of domestic terrorism, Kaczynski ultimately had no real impact on the world. His war against technology ended in complete failure.